It was a heavy night, with torrential rain falling relentlessly over the city. The sky was covered in dark, almost suffocating clouds that poured down in waves, as if the world itself was crying. Robert, a 50-year-old man, was driving his car through the drenched streets, barely able to see ahead. The dim lighting from the street lamps only emphasized the loneliness of the night. He was returning from another exhausting day at work, his mind burdened with worries, when something unexpected happened. A shadowy figure appeared out of nowhere, running awkwardly across the street. Robert only had time to slam on the brakes, but the impact was inevitable. His heart raced as the car skidded on the wet asphalt, coming to an abrupt stop. What was that? Robert whispered to himself, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Terrified, he got out of the car, the rain soaking his clothes in seconds. On the ground not far away, he saw a young woman lying motionless. A feeling of panic took over his body. Approaching with hesitant steps, he finally saw her clearly. She was disheveled, with hair stuck to her pale face, like a broken porcelain doll. My God, did I kill her? His voice came out weak, almost inaudible, mixed with the sound of rain. But then, he noticed a subtle movement. She was alive. The young woman moved slightly, letting out a groan of pain. Robert knelt beside her, trying to help her sit up. Her gaze met his, and what Robert saw there hit him harder than the accident. Her eyes, despite the pain, had a desperate depth, a sadness that seemed infinite. Are you okay? He asked, not quite knowing how to express the guilt he felt. His voice was hoarse, trembling as much as his hands. He extended his arm to help her up, feeling the weight of her fragile body. I don't know, she replied with difficulty, her voice faltering. I was running, didn't look. Why were you running? What happened? Robert tried to stay calm, but the tension in his voice was evident. I was running away, she whispered, with irregular breathing. Can't go back, can't. The desperation in her words pierced Robert like a sharp blade. He didn't know who she was, but he knew he couldn't leave her there, alone in the rain. He couldn't just turn his back. She looked so small, so vulnerable, like a lost child in a cruel world. My name is Robert, he said softly, trying to comfort her. Let me help you. I'll take you to my place. You can warm up, dry off, then we'll decide what to do, okay? Emily, with wide eyes full of tears, looked at him for a few moments, as if trying to decide if she could trust the stranger who had just hit her with his car. Finally, she nodded, unable to find the words. Robert helped her up and carefully led her to the car. As the rain continued to fall, he felt a new weight in his heart, a responsibility he couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. He didn't know what was to come, but he knew that this rainy night had changed something inside him. The journey to Robert's apartment was silent, except for the sound of rain beating against the car. Emily was huddled in the passenger seat, shivering, with her arms tightly crossed against her body. Robert cast worried glances in her direction, but said nothing. He could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, a burden she seemed to have carried alone for too long. When they finally arrived, Robert opened the door to his modest apartment and let her enter first. The place was small but cozy, with simple furniture and an air of familiarity that made it a refuge from the outside world. You can sit there, Robert indicated the couch, still not knowing how to break the uncomfortable silence. He went to the closet and got a clean towel, handing it to Emily. Here, dry yourself off a bit. I'll prepare something hot for you to eat. Emily took the towel with trembling hands, barely able to find the words. Thank you, she murmured, almost as if surprised by his kindness. She sat on the couch, trying to warm her soaked body, while Robert headed to the kitchen. He prepared a simple soup, his thoughts tangled with questions he didn't dare ask aloud. Who was this girl? What led her to this situation? The heavy silence in the apartment was only interrupted by the soft sound of the stove and her occasional sniffling. When the soup was ready, Robert placed a bowl on the table in front of her and sat down beside her, not quite sure how to start the conversation. You must be starving. Eat slowly. There's no need to rush, he said, trying to comfort her with a gentle tone. Emily picked up the spoon, but hesitated before bringing the food to her mouth. Robert noticed the hesitation, but said nothing. He knew she needed time. After a few spoonfuls, she finally spoke, her voice weak, as if the words had been trapped for a long time. You shouldn't have brought me here. I'm trouble. I don't want to cause anyone more problems. Robert frowned, feeling a tightness in his chest. Emily, nobody deserves to be alone in a moment like this. Whatever your story is, you don't need to carry this weight alone. She lowered her head, as if fighting back tears. I don't know where to start. My life. Everything crumbled so fast. Before I knew it, I was on the streets, with no one to help me. I can listen if you want to talk, he replied, trying to offer some comfort. Emily took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to face her demons. I had a family, had a home, but my father passed away. My mother couldn't handle it. She sank into addictions, started blaming me for everything. One day, some men came into my house and wanted to take me as payment for my mother's addiction debts, but I was faster and ran away. Robert felt a lump form in his throat. He knew many people lived stories of suffering, but hearing this directly from Emily made her pain seem even more real, even more unbearable. I tried to survive on my own, but the streets are cruel. I lost everything, my dignity, my hope. She looked at her own hands as if they were foreign to her. And now, I just wanted to disappear. Robert felt a weight in his chest, as if her words were stones, each one crushing a bit more of his soul. He wanted to say something, anything that could alleviate the pain she was feeling, but there were no words that could heal such deep wounds. Emily, nobody deserves to go through that. Nobody deserves to be treated that way, he finally managed to say, his voice laden with emotion. I don't know how, but I want to help you. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and for the first time, Robert saw something beyond sadness there. He saw a glimmer of hope, fragile and trembling, but present. She didn't respond immediately, but in that silence, something began to change. The connection forming between the two, built on pain and suffering, was something rare and precious. The days passed slowly, and Emily began to regain some of her physical strength. Each morning, she seemed a little more stable, a little less pale, but her eyes continued to carry a shadow, a weight that Robert couldn't ignore. He strived to provide her with a safe environment, trying to fill the apartment with a warmth that he himself had forgotten how to feel. One day, as Robert was coming home from work, he noticed a black car parked almost in front of his house, and a tall man got out, speaking to him. You've been hanging out with the wrong person. The voice sounded cold, cutting like ice. Emily isn't who you think she is. Stay away from her, or you'll end up regretting it. Robert was paralyzed, his mind racing a mile a minute. Who was this person? How did they know about Emily? And why were they threatening him? He returned to the front door with his head full of questions, and when he saw Emily, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea in her hands, the weight of uncertainty almost brought him to his knees. She looked so fragile, so vulnerable, but he knew there was more behind that facade. Emily, he began, his voice hoarser than usual. Today I received a threat, actually. Someone across the street knew you, said I should stay away from you. Emily froze, her fingers gripping the cup so tightly he feared it might break. She didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the dark liquid in front of her. I knew this could happen, she finally murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Who were they, Emily? Robert pressed, feeling anxiety tightening his chest. What aren't you telling me? She finally raised her eyes to meet his, and what he saw there left him speechless. Pure, desperate fear, mixed with something darker, something he couldn't identify. I didn't want you to get involved, Robert, she said, with a sadness so deep it seemed to weigh on every word. Involved? In what, Emily? You need to be honest with me, please. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage to confess something terrible. There are people, dangerous people, who don't want me to stay alive. They did things, terrible things to my mother, and I witnessed it. And for that, they hunt me. They wanted me as payment for her debts, but they killed her in front of me first. And when I had the chance, I ran to survive, but they always find me. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. And you never told this to anyone? How could I? She replied bitterly. Who would believe a homeless girl, a street kid? Nobody wants to know. Nobody cares. I just wanted to disappear before they could reach me. Robert leaned back in his chair, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he was getting into something much bigger than he expected. Doubts began to grow inside him, mixed with fear. Should he continue helping her, knowing it could put his own life in danger? But as he looked at Emily, still huddled on the couch, tears finally streaming down her face. He felt a different pain, the pain of imagining what she had endured alone for so long. He couldn't simply abandon her now. "Emily," he said firmly, "if there's anything we can do to keep you safe, we'll find a way. But I need you to trust me. Together, we'll figure out a way out." She looked at him, surprised and relieved, but still hesitant. "You don't understand, Robert. This could cost you your life." "I know," he replied, with a determination he didn't know he had. "But there are things in life worth the risk, and no one should go through this alone." The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken feelings. Robert knew that the choices he was making could lead them down dangerous paths. But the idea of leaving her helpless, afraid, and alone was something he simply couldn't bear. Their routine changed after that tense night. Robert did what he could to keep the threats at bay, but the presence of those cold words continued to hover over both of them. However, a new light began to emerge amidst the darkness. One day, while tidying up the small apartment, Robert found an old folder worn by time, hidden under a pile of Emily's clothes. He opened it carefully, not wanting to invade her privacy, but curiosity was stronger. Inside were drawings, pencil sketches, some blurred by water stains, perhaps tears, others unfinished, but all revealed a talent he never expected to find in a young woman who had lived on the streets. When Emily came home, he was sitting at the kitchen table, with some of the drawings spread out in front of him. She froze at the door, her eyes widening in surprise and panic. You found this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Robert looked up at her, his expression soft, understanding. "Yes, I found it. Emily, did you make these drawings? They're incredible." She bit her lip, hesitating. "I used to draw before everything fell apart, but that was a long time ago. I stopped. It didn't make sense anymore." Robert shook his head. "You can't give up something like this, Emily. It's a talent, a way to express everything you feel, everything you've been through. Why didn't you tell me about this?" She approached slowly, as if unsure how to react. "I was trying to forget who I was. When you live on the streets, you don't think about things like art. You only think about surviving." "But you're not alone anymore," Robert replied, his voice firm. "You have me, and together we can find a way. I believe art can help you find a new direction." Emily looked at the drawings on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she ran her fingers over the paper. "I don't know, Robert. I don't know if I'm capable of doing this again." "You'll never know if you don't try," he said gently. "Here, you're safe. At least for now. Why not start slowly? Maybe paint again without pressure, just for yourself." She remained silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the lines of the old drawings. Then, with a deep sigh, she nodded. Maybe I should try." In the days that followed, Robert did his best to arrange painting materials. Even with his tight budget, he found a way to buy some paints, brushes, and small canvases. At first, Emily seemed unsure, her hands hesitant as she held the brush, as if she had forgotten how to create. But with time, the movement became more natural, and soon, colors began to fill the small apartment, giving life to a place that was once marked by shadows. "I didn't even remember how this made me feel," Emily admitted one night, as she showed Robert a newly finished painting. It was a landscape, but the colors were intense, almost chaotic, reflecting the turmoil of emotions inside her. "It's like releasing everything that was stuck in here." Robert smiled, observing the shy sparkle in her eyes. "That's what art does. It allows us to express what words can't." She looked at him with silent recognition. "Do you really believe I can start over?" "I believe everyone deserves a second chance," he replied, sincerely. "And maybe, just maybe, painting is yours." The bond between them grew with each brushstroke, each night conversation about the challenges of the past and hopes for the future. The next night, Robert looked at Emily's painting. Still wet, the vivid and expressive colors conveying a depth of emotion he had never seen before. He stood there, motionless, absorbing every detail, every brushstroke that seemed to scream the suffering and hope that coexisted within her. The idea struck his mind like lightning. Without thinking twice, he took out his cell phone and snapped a photo of the canvas, capturing that work of art that carried Emily's soul. He sent the image to his friend Andrew, an art curator living in Paris, along with a brief message. "Andrew, you need to see this. It's from the girl I'm helping. She has incredible talent. Call me as soon as you can." It didn't take long for his phone to ring. Andrew's voice on the other end sounded intrigued and excited at the same time. "Robert, where did you find this? This painting, it's a rare authenticity." Andrew asked, almost breathless. Robert sighed, knowing he would have to reveal more than he'd like. "It's a long story, Andrew. Her name is Emily. I found her on the street, practically with nothing, and since then, I've been trying to help her get back on her feet. She has a difficult past. She's running from something, from someone. But art is the only thing that seems to give meaning to her life now." Andrew was silent for a moment, absorbing the story. "Robert, you know that Paris is a place for someone with this kind of talent. Here, she would have a chance to start over, away from whatever is chasing her. I could help her get established, enter the art world. But it's a big change. Do you think she's ready for this?" Robert looked at Emily, who was sitting on the couch, distracted with a book, oblivious to the conversation that was about to change her life. He knew this was the only way out for her, the only chance to escape the shadow that pursued her. "She has no other choice, Andrew," Robert finally replied, with determination. "I can't protect her forever, and here, she's in danger. If she goes to Paris, not only will she be safe, but she'll also have the chance to dedicate herself to her art, to find a new life." Andrew agreed. "Understood, Robert. I'll do what I can to help her. When do you want this to happen?" Robert took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision. "As soon as possible. We can't risk waiting any longer." Hanging up the phone, he turned to Emily, who was now watching him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Who was that?" she asked, noticing the seriousness in his expression. "It was my friend Andrew," he began, choosing his words carefully. "He lives in Paris and works with art. I showed him your painting, Emily, and he was impressed. Very impressed." She blinked, surprised, but not understanding what he was implying. "What does that mean, Robert?" Robert moved closer and sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "It means you have an opportunity, a chance to leave all this behind and start a new life. Andrew thinks you could have a future in art, but for that, you need to go to Paris. He'll help you there, guide you in this world, and I think it's the best thing for you." Emily pulled her hands away, shaking her head in confusion and fear. "Paris? Robert, I can't do that. I don't even know where to start. And you? What will happen to you?" He felt a tightness in his heart, but knew he had to be strong. "I'll be fine, Emily. I've always managed on my own, but you need this chance. If you stay here, you'll keep running, always afraid. In Paris, you can be free. You can live off your art, and I'll always be just a phone call away." Tears began to stream down Emily's face, but she said nothing, just hugged him tightly. Robert's heart broke at the thought of saying goodbye, but he knew he was doing the right thing. He held her close, as if wanting to engrave that moment in his memory forever. "Robert, I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice choked. "You saved my life in so many ways, and now you're giving me a new life." He closed his eyes, fighting back his own tears. "Don't thank me, Emily. Just promise me you'll make it worth it, that you'll find the happiness you deserve." She nodded against his shoulder, and at that moment, they both knew they were about to embark on a new journey, one that would separate them physically, but would unite them forever through what they had shared. After 2 years, Robert arrived in Paris on a cloudy day, the gray sky reflecting the whirlwind of emotions that accompanied him. The city, with its majestic architecture and busy streets, seemed indifferent to the lonely man walking down its avenues, each step heavier than the last. He wondered what it would be like to see her again, the young woman he had pulled from the shadows and sent into a new world. What would he find? Who would he find? He had received a simple and direct invitation. Vernissage. Emily Laurent, Galerie des Arts, Montmartre. Reading the French name she now used, Robert felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of pride and longing. Emily Laurent. She had completely reinvented herself. The gallery was full when he arrived, with elegantly dressed people moving from one work to another, whispering in admiration. Robert paused at the entrance, observing the paintings on the walls, each of them emanating a strength and emotion that he immediately recognized. They were the cries of a soul he had seen up close, but which was now free, flying high. Suddenly, his eyes found something familiar. In the corner of the room, Emily was talking to a group of guests, her hair elegantly tied up, a simple but sophisticated dress shaping her figure. She looked like a different person, but at the same time, she was the same young woman he had rescued from the streets. There was something in her posture, in her smile, that showed a new confidence, a new life. She turned, and her eyes met his. For a moment, the world around them disappeared, as if time had stopped. She excused herself from the guests and walked towards Robert, her heart beating hard in her chest. When she reached him, they looked at each other in silence, absorbing the impact of the reunion. "Robert," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You came." He smiled, a smile that mixed relief, pride, and a deep longing. "I said I'd always be just a phone call away. You really made it worth it, Emily. I'm so proud of you." She blinked, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you, not just for bringing me to Paris, but for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself anymore. These works, this exhibition, all of this is only possible because you gave me a new chance." Robert looked around, absorbing every detail of the paintings she had created. "These works are extraordinary, Emily. They're full of pain, but also of hope. They tell your story, and I'm just a small part of it." She shook her head, taking his hand in hers. "You're the most important part, Robert. You were the turning point, the moment when my life began to change. Every brushstroke you see here was inspired by what we lived through together, by what you did for me. I can never thank you enough." They stood in silence for a moment, just feeling the connection that united them, something that words could never fully express. Around them, people continued to admire the works, oblivious to the powerful story that had led to the creation of each of them. "So, what are you going to do now, Emily?" Robert asked, his voice soft but filled with genuine curiosity. "You found your place here in Paris. What's next?" She smiled, a smile full of promises and possibilities. "I'm going to keep creating, keep exploring this new life you've given me." She sat down next to him, her eyes shining with a mix of emotions. "I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm listening," Robert replied, feeling a slight tightness in his chest, uncertain about what she was going to say. Emily took a deep breath, looking at him with a gaze that carried the weight of everything she had been through. "My last work, the most valuable one, was sold," she began, her words slow, as if they weighed on her tongue. "And it was for a sum much larger than I could ever have imagined." Robert was silent for a moment, absorbing the news. He had seen the work in a photo on his phone, a powerful and intense painting that captured the essence of pain and redemption. It was a reflection of everything she had lived through, of everything she had overcome. "That's incredible, Emily. I knew you could do it," he said, trying to hide the pride and emotion that threatened to take over. She held his hands tightly, her eyes full of tears she was trying to hold back. "But I couldn't have done this without you, Robert. You were the first to believe in me, the first to give me a chance when I thought there was no hope left." Robert shook his head, trying to deflect attention from the role he had played. "You did this on your own, Emily. I just gave you a push. The talent, the strength, all of that was inside you." She smiled sadly, still holding his hands. "And that's why I've decided that the money should be used for something bigger than just me. I want to give this amount to you, Robert. You helped me when I had nothing, and now I want to give back." Robert looked at her, surprised and touched by the offer, but he shook his head. "Emily, I can't accept that. The money is yours. You worked hard to earn it. I'm just happy to see how much you've transformed, how much you've overcome." But Emily didn't give in. "It's not just out of gratitude, Robert, with the sale of the other works. I also want to use this money to help other people who are on the streets, like I once was. I want to give them the chance you gave me. I want to be a light in the darkness, just as you were for me." Robert felt tears welling up in his eyes, moved by Emily's generosity and strength. He looked at her with deep affection, feeling the impact of the moment in his heart. "You have an incredible heart, Emily," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "If that's your decision, then I accept. But know that the greatest gift you could give me is to see you happy. You're like a daughter to me, a daughter I never had." She smiled through her tears, feeling a peace she had never felt before. "Thank you, Robert. I can never thank you enough." The two sat in silence, holding each other's hands, while the distant sound of Paris streets echoed around them. There was sadness in the air, but also hope, a new light shining through the dark clouds that had covered their lives for so long. Robert's simple act of kindness had triggered a chain of changes that was now spreading, touching lives in ways he could never have imagined. And in that moment, they both knew that, despite all the pain and suffering, something beautiful had emerged from it all, something that would last forever,